of different, and I mostly in dressage, but then got into eventing and got my first off the track thoroughbred at 14. And he was very special to me and lived to the ripe old age of 29 and retired out there on the island. When I finished high school, when I finished high school, I went to university at what was Malaspina University College, that's now called Vancouver Island University, which is in Nanaimo, so that I could keep competing. In my final year, they had a very special fourth year research project, and that was my first dabble into equine parasitology, so diagnosing worms in horses. So I followed, a cohort of horses over an entire year to see what their parasite levels were, and just trying to learn more about transmission patterns, especially in a temperate climate where they don't get winter like we do here. And I believe whoever's from Utah, you get enough winter to kind of pause that transmission season as well. When I was close to graduating, I didn't really know what I wanted to do when I grew up. And the opportunity to move out here to Alberta and go to the University of Lethbridge, but doing all of my research and wet lab work out of Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, which is a big research station down in Lethbridge, presented itself. And so I had co-advisors, one from Ag Canada, one from the university, wrote to the Agriculture Funding Consortium and Marielle Pharmaceuticals for funding, and I was successful in getting 3 years, which is kind of rare for a master's, because we wanted to follow 2 entire field seasons to understand transmission patterns and prevalence of different worms, which I'll tell you about today. My project, we got 2 publications out of, and when I graduated, I moved up to Calgary, coincidentally, when the veterinary school was opening here in 2008. And I got a job, in research immediately, and then I got a teaching job running the anatomy labs for the veterinary students. I did that for 12 years, and then we expanded the class, and they created a pathology teaching position, and I took that. And went on mat leave, and during mat leave, I applied and am now the operations manager for the diagnostic services unit. So a quick snippet, Alberta hasn't had in-province veterinary diagnostics since the 1990s. And so this unit, we're a fee-for-service veterinary diagnostic lab, and we do a huge proportion of insurance horse cases. So we do postmortems to figure out why animals have died. We have a full bacteriology lab that does culture and susceptibility. So you have a wound that won't heal, your vet can send a swab to us, and we can rapidly diagnose what bacteria are there, but also provide information with our MIC panels, which is a minimum inhibitory concentration of antimicrobials to then treat that infection, so your vet can pick the right antibiotic to prescribe. We have a serology lab, which is very important for poultry producers, looking at vaccine titers, but also for some cattle producers looking at Johne's infection. And we've most recently opened, my near and dear to my heart, a parasitology lab. Right now we're only open to ruminant species because we have been working kind of off a side bench in one of our other labs while we've been waiting for the renovations to the actual lab section to be complete. We just received keys last week. So we're working to try and get equine fecal testing up and running, which is, I'm going to talk a lot today about why diagnosing and looking for your wormy horses in your herd is really important. We're about to open a molecular biology lab, so that is like rapid bacterial and viral detection. Because all of our funding for expansion is agriculture centered, the livestock species are our priority to open testing for. And yeah, that's our lab sections. So we're embedded with the University of Calgary in the Faculty of Veterinary Medicine. So we teach students veterinary diagnostics, and then we also teach like postmortem and necropsies. So the actual taking apart of the animals to try and figure out why they died. And we also have a histopathology lab. So if your horse or your dog or your cat or any of your animals have a lump or bump that your veterinarian thinks that should be biopsied and sent in, we also provide that sort of service as well. I continue to ride, not as much as I would like. I am riding a beautiful little Welsh cob pony that I am able to flexibly half lease. I competed a lot in the 2014, 15, 16, 17 seasons with Alberta Horse Trials. I think I made it to most of the events except Grand Prairie. With my little red quarter horse, Chief. You may or may not recognize my name. And it's really, I'm really proud to have been invited to come and speak on behalf of the University of Calgary and Alberta Horse Trials. So thank you for inviting me to do this. And I hope that I can teach all of you a little bit about horse parasites and how we need to evolve our thinking on their control. Does anybody have any questions before I start? Okay. Oops.
I actually do. I'm the one from Utah.
Yes.
And if I wind up in a weird face on the camera because I'm haven't done Zoom in a while, please forgive me. Uh, my name is also Sara, but I have an H, and I'm getting a horse she's coming from Florida. She's originally from Maryland, and she'll be getting here at the second week of April. So I'm just trying to figure out what, you know, deworming I should do. And I know I'm probably getting way ahead of the conversation. Um, but if I should have them do a fecal before she comes, and also if I should wait till we have our last freezing frost, nasty weather here.
Okay, hold that question, and I will
Okay,
make.
sorry.
No, it's perfect. I
Okay,
will
cool.
circle back and
Okay,
fully answer it when we get to the end.
awesome. Okay, I just didn't want to forget.
Okay, thanks, Sarah.
Okay, thanks.
Exciting, by the way.
Sorry?
Very exciting that you're getting a new horse.
Yes, yeah, I had a lot of bad luck in 24, so fingers crossed. Okay, I'll shut up now so we can get back to it.
All good.
Thanks.
So, just some pictures of my past. This is my off the track thoroughbred. That's the horrific looking little skinny, scrawny man in the bottom middle when I got him. There's Chief. I don't know if Jess, you might remember this. That would have been Cochrane 2016. So for today, really what I hope to disseminate is that you understand what a parasite is, learning the general life cycles, strategies for parasite control, and how they've changed from the rotational deworming mindset. And it really depends on how your horse lives, especially in Alberta, where we have winter. And in parasite control, I think as horse people, we're pretty proactive um, in our horse's health, and we need to remember that parasites have evolved with our horses, and the goal is not elimination. The goal is reducing pasture contamination and controlling the amount of recontamination. The dewormer resistance is now a very common factor, and that needs to be identified when treatment decisions are being made. So when we talk about resistance, it's the ability of the worms to survive that deworming treatment. And then young horses, so under 3-year-olds, need to be treated very differently because there's some parasites that horses will build an innate immunity to, and then there's other parasites that will just chronically infect them. Here, this is the whaleback down in southern Alberta. This was a really fun ride that I went on. So a parasite, what is it? It's an organism living in or on another living organism that it obtains part or all of its nutrients and commonly exhibits some degree of modification. So it will cause some degree of damage to its host, but obviously for the parasite, they don't want to actually kill their host because then their life is over as well. So as I just referred to, there's been this evolution of symbiosis or working together. The parasite has a metabolic commitment to its host, and the parasites are a living creature that's evolved an adaptation to live in or on and has a potential to harm. So most of what I will talk about today are internal parasites because in Alberta, we don't typically have huge tick, flea, or louse infestations in our domestic horses. This is pretty cool. Another little tidbit, my undergraduate research advisor and my graduate master's research advisor are two brothers who both have PhDs in parasitology. One focused on amphibians and one focused on fish. And the fish parasitologist was my co-advisor for my master's. And while he was on sabbatical, he and his brother rewrote this book, which was written by Jerry Esch from Wake Forest University in North Carolina, I believe. And they put a picture of the tapeworm that I studied for my master's, which is the blue one right above the eye, on the cover of their book, which is a pretty big honor. Okay, so how are horses or just animals in general affected by worms? So the majority of so on the y-axis going up, we have the number of horses. Can you see my cursor if I'm there? I don't know how here we go, laser pointer. Now can you see me?
Yeah, you're good.
There we go, number of horses and number of worms. So here we have, say, one horse has a few worms, and then two horses have a bit more worms. And then, so the majority of your horses, like one horse, okay, sorry, it's been a long day. The majority of your hosts have very few worms in them, but a few of your animals are going to be very susceptible to infection and have high levels of infection. So this is kind of the curve, the classic curve we talk about when we talk about parasite infection. So it's these horses that have the high infections that you want to treat to reduce the infection on your pasture. So at one time, the goals of parasite control were to try and eliminate them. And now we've figured out that we need to limit infections so that they stay healthy and they don't develop any clinical signs of illness. So FEC, you'll see that throughout my presentation. This means fecal egg count. So it's the number of eggs in the horse poop. So really what Europe has done a really amazing job of is preventing contamination of the environment. So that means picking up the poop so that the eggs of the parasites don't have a chance to mature into infective larvae. This is why my title of my presentation is The Grazing Horse Gets the Worm, because it's the grazing horses that are the most susceptible. By identifying the horses that have high number of worms and are releasing high number of eggs into the pasture, you'll better be able to control all of your herd. And then the treatments are timed to kill the worms before they start passing huge amounts. So the hard part of, I feel like the horse world has really grabbed traction on rotating the number of drugs. The problem is the drug companies have come out with all these different packaging that look different, that may or may not be a different actual type of drug. So we're moving more towards a diagnosis type treatment. So many clinics now will perform in-house fecal egg counts, and they will give you either eggs per gram of feces, and then there are charts that recommend at what point number of eggs per gram you should deworm. The other way they will give you results is that they will categorize them as a high, medium, or low shedding horse. So the idea is to treat the wormy horses. And there's another more research way of doing things, but also in the southern US where they don't really get winter, a lot of clinics and a lot of diagnostic labs, veterinary diagnostic labs, will do fecal egg count reduction tests. And this is beyond what owners need to know, but essentially what happens is you do an initial fecal egg count, you treat the horse, and then 2 weeks later, you do another fecal egg count to see how much reduction in the number of eggs per gram has occurred. And with that number, you can then calculate if you have resistant worms that are not being affected by the dewormer treatments. So this is directly out of the American Association of Equine Practitioners Parasite Control Guidelines. So this is a panel of the world's experts, mostly North American, of parasitologists that put together these suggested guidelines for classifying. So there's the eggs per gram that I was talking about, and the different categories and how they categorize them. So back to that graph I was showing you. So 50 to 70% of the population of horses will have low egg counts. 10 to 20% will be in that moderate range, and 20 to 30 or even less, depending on where in North America you are, will be the high shedders. Okay, this is partially why horses are built wrong. This is the gastrointestinal tract of a horse. So horses are, unlike cattle or ruminants, they are a hindgut fermenter. So their small intestine is small, and then it dumps into this big, huge part, which is the cecum and colon, which is where the horses do their fermentation. So they're called a hindgut fermenter. So the esophagus comes down, enters the stomach. The stomach then has the duodenum and small intestine. And then it, in behind here, right here, kind of wiggles in behind, dumps into this V-shaped organ, which is the cecum. So that's a big site of parasite infection. And then what you can also appreciate by this image is that horses' GI tracts go from a very narrow tube to a very big tube to a very narrow tube to a very big tube to a very narrow tube to another very big tube. So that's a big factor in why we have colics. And this is the site where impaction colic is the worst. It's called the pelvic flexure, and it's where the colon transitions from ventral to dorsal. So the first parasite I'm going to talk about are bots. I think all of you will have probably seen the little eggs, the little pale yellow to white eggs that the bot flies lay on horses' legs. And they depend on the horse itching their face on their leg to then have their eggs stick to the mouth and be ingested. So this is the main reason why every horse in our neck of the woods needs to be dewormed after a first good frost, because these guys will hang out. I'll show you the life cycle here. So there's our little bot friends. This is actually my gelding, my chestnut gelding. I'm sure everybody has seen those little bot brushes. It's like a stone that you can use to pull those eggs off. And then here is horse stomach. So this part is the glandular part, which is more like our stomach. And then this part is the non-glandular. So we actually have two different species of bots. So these are little tiny pupated larvae that will overwinter in the horse's stomach if you don't deworm. And I think everybody is pretty versed in ulcers. When you have this type of large infection, and those are all holding on to the gut lining with either suckers or hooks, it's going to cause mechanical damage to that stomach. So then these larvae overwinter, and from physiological changes in the horse, they are triggered to pupate into hard little nugget larvae, and they're passed out in the feces of the horse. And those little pupae sit in that fecal ball, and they mature, and the adult fly will then crack out of that pupa, which then lays eggs on the horse's legs. The most common parasite of horses are strongyles. There's two types of strongyles, large and small. By microscopic identification of eggs, it's very difficult, almost impossible to tell if an egg like this is a large strongyle or a small strongyle. And they're small red worms that suck the blood by being inside the intestine and attaching to the intestinal wall. So the small strongyles are the most common and less harmful to the horse. The large strongyles, which is partially why ivermectin was created, were very pathogenic because they would migrate outside of the gut into arteries of the gut, and they could cause, by their attachment in those arteries, they could cause those artery walls to rip and then the horse to bleed out internally. So they live in that big triangular shaped cecum and large intestine or colon, and they can cause digestive problems. So here is their life cycle. They're shedding the feces onto pasture. The larvae emerge and mature, and their maturation and their infective level is dependent on temperature and moisture. So if it's really hot and dry, they probably won't make it to the infective stage to then be eaten by grazing. And here are a few of these little guys hanging out in the gut contents. But this is where the damage is. So this is a very awful looking, so that this is a nice, clean, smooth piece of artery. Where it dumped into here, this is a big aneurysm or widening of the arterial wall with a bunch of little parasites in here, immature. The eggs look approximately like this, and they're shedding feces, and the cycle just keeps going. Ascarids are a bigger type of roundworm. They're the spaghetti worms, and they're most commonly found in young horses. So horses actually build an adaptive immunity by being infected by these to resisting infection, but they can grow big, like. And there's danger, like this picture here is from our unit, from a horse that came in for a postmortem that had died. It didn't die because of this, but this was not contributing to its overall health because that's how many worms were in its small intestine. This is the life cycle, basically the same as the others. Horses eat the eggs, the adult worms mature in the intestine, and then eggs are shed out in the feces. And they're these big, we call them like sun looking dark brown eggs. And they're most commonly found in younger horses. Pinworms. So a lot of people will notice their horses rubbing their tail heads out, and that is a good indication that your horse has pinworms. So they rub out their tail heads like this, and you can see the egg sacs sometimes around the rectum. It's very important to try and do a fecal float and diagnose, because in Alberta, at least, we have a lot of biting flies that will bite the tail head of horses. So you might not actually have a pinworm infection. You might just need to apply a topical deterrent, like fly spray, to keep the flies from biting your horse. So these eggs are super sticky, and that's why when you have horses in moving between stalls, you're going to want to clean the buckets, and or have, it's not so bad in Alberta because we have such dry weather, so the eggs will desiccate, and they have the same direct life cycle. Strongyloides is way less common in the prairie provinces, but southern US, much more common. And usually clinical signs are only seen in foals and young horses up to 2 years of age. Heavy infections can cause problems, and foals can start shedding 10 to 14 days after birth. This is really complicated. There's kind of a dual life cycle in these horses, or in these worms. I'm going to quickly go through it. You have your eggs, they mature in different larval stages, and they keep going in the environment. But then you have penetration or ingestion by the horse. It can go to the lungs, it migrates through the blood, and so you get coughing. And the adult females migrate to the intestine. If there's the other skin penetration, they can go into the bloodstream, they can go into muscles, and then they can be passed to the foal through the mother's milk. And then this is my baby. This is the picture here that was on the front of that book. So it's a high electron micrograph image of these tiny horse tapeworms. So they're not much bigger than my thumb in life. This is one of the very high infections I found, right where this is where the small intestine enters into the cecum, and all of these worms are aggregating there, tapeworms, because that's where the high level of nutrients in the ingesta or food is coming through. So they're in tapeworm scale, they're quite small, but they're unique in that instead of having hooks on their scolex, they have these muscular suckers. So they actually do more damage because they're pulling in big chunks of the intestinal lining to hold on. I already spoke about all this. So the hard part about diagnosing these worms is unless they're mature and these body segments are maturing and shedding off the packets of eggs, they're undetectable by a fecal exam. So we have our adults. So here's another spot where the small intestine is entering into the cecum. These little body segments fall off containing the eggs, and because they're so thin, they break apart as they move out to the rectum. Eggs are shed, and then this is a really unique feature. The eggs must be eaten by a type of soil mite in order to finish their development and then be ingested. And I show this picture because this mare, most people when they think of tapeworms, they think super skinny, dull hair coat, not very happy horse. Well, this very well-conditioned mare was one of my test subjects, and she was one of the first I ever found an infection in. And I followed her for 2 years of field seasons. Here's a little bit of my results. So my master's research was 2006, 2007. A side note, during the winter of 2006 is really when Quest Plus and Praziquantel came on the market. So this represents kind of a naive group of horses that had never been dewormed with the full dose that could kill tapeworms. And then we see the prevalence drop as the years go on, but are higher in winter because the horses pick up the parasites during the summer, and then they're detected in the winter. So I split my study group into horses that were exposed to grazing pasture where other horses were grazing, and to horses that were not exposed to pasture. So out of 314 horses, only 2 of the horses that were not exposed to pasture had tapeworms, which means that management is a huge part of their transmission. A few little pieces from my research is that fecal egg counts are still unreliable and underestimate actual infection. These are the different types of analyses I used to determine if the horses were infected. Now, other Sara, this is something that you are going to want to check your new horse for. So in the southern states and in donkeys, lungworms are more prevalent. And in the southern states is because of their humidity levels. We being nice and dry and cold here.
Or lack thereof.
They live most of their life in the bronchial tree of horses and donkeys, and they like if you have a horse that coughs at rest, that is a potential sign of lungworm infection. And I didn't put the life cycle in here because it's very uncommon, but veterinarians definitely need to be aware of it because horses travel down to the south and come back up here. So I put this
Question.
in.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Are the lungworms detectable doing fecal examination, or is there another way to screen for them?
I just have a brain blank. I will have an answer for you by the end of the presentation.
Okay. I guess that was a good question.
Does anybody need a break? I have about 10, 15 more minutes max.
You're good. Keep going.
Okay. So back to traditional parasite control. So we have all these different drugs on the market. This is the one that came out during my research. Quest had been on the market already. So a lot of owners, because they're very proactive, think that buying a different colored package is actually buying a different type of drug, but unfortunately it's not. And traditional control is just deworming every 3 months. So that strategy is based on concepts that were established more than 40 years ago when it was the large strongylls that were the pathogen that we were worried about. And so these dewormers kill the worms before they can lay eggs to shed on pasture. So people were just doing it every 3 months to get rid of all of those adult worms. We, as in our unit, so because we teach and we do a little bit of research, we just did a retrospective study looking at past cases with that noted Strongylus vulgaris infection, and we're seeing a reemergence of disease, which is scary because it means they're resistant to these dewormers. The small strongyls weren't considered in those guidelines as important pathogens, but now we're realizing that those are the ones that are the most out there, and we need to look at how we can adapt our strategies to make sure that our dewormers continue to be effective. As I said, the ascarids or spaghetti worms are only really a concern of young horses, and that horses can build an immunoglobulin or that they can create their own immunity to them. So the biology of the life cycle, the host, so the horse parasite dynamics are all very different than the large strongyls, so we can't keep deworming the same way. So because of these decades of ivermectin treatment, it's selected for worms to be resistant. And so the resistance is the ability of worms to survive the treatments that were generally effective. And small strongyls are all over the world. So ubiquitous means they're everywhere. All horses have them. We've never really eradicated them. So the proper timing of treatments is important. The effective drugs are important, and the appropriate time of the year is important based on when horses are becoming infected. So most of Europe has gone to prescription deworming now. So without a fecal egg count in the mid to high range, you wouldn't even be prescribed the dewormer. They have so many horses on such high density, they don't want to promote any type of resistance. These two drugs are becoming less and less effective. There's more resistance to them. So I mentioned foals before. Foals are unique, and you need to work with your veterinarian in your region. By foals, I mean up to 1 year. Most veterinarians will recommend 4 treatments, and the American Association of Equine Practitioners has a recommendation in their document of guidelines. And then tapeworm treatment should be after the grazing season with one of the above at the appropriate time, depending on when the horse is born. So it kind of comes down to highlighting also environmental control, which I know in our neck of the woods, especially with large expanses of land, is more challenging. So the eggs hatch and develop in moderate temperatures and moisture conditions. Cold slows or stops their growth. Heat and dry, or heat or dry, stops and slows the growth. If manure is properly composted, the heat of composting will deactivate. And so therefore non-composted manure shouldn't be respread on pastures, because you could just be contaminating your pastures. In Alberta, really, we only need 1 to 2 annual treatments, deworming treatments, to prevent the occurrence of most of the parasites that we see here. And hopefully I'm not overdoing it, but we can't keep deworming in the same way. We need to diagnose the horses that are high shedders and then target control to those horses. Oh, I didn't even have 10 minutes left. So none of all of this in my research and education wouldn't have been possible without so many different people. And I really thank you all for joining me to listen, and I hope that I can help change the mindset of a lot more horse people to looking at diagnosis and targeted treatment. And without all of these guys, so I followed 350 horses over 2 years for my research. And it wouldn't have been possible without their dropping donations. As my parents joke, I have a master's in poop. And that has been years and years of jokes. But I had really amazing horse owners that were willing to let me tromp around in their pastures after their horses and collect poop. And this little baby face is my now 22-year-old retired quarter horse that I competed in Alberta horse trials with. That's him as a weanling. So now back to questions. Okay, lungworm. Let me look up lungworm and make sure I give you.
That was awesome, Sarah. Thank you. While you're Googling your things, yeah, if anybody has any questions, feel free to put them in the chat or just pop on and ask.
Okay, so you'd need a diagnostic lab to do it. I thought I figured I was going to be right, but I didn't want to say something and be wrong. So it's done by a larval culture called the Bayerman technique, because the eggs are shed in the feces because the horses cough them up. The adult worms live in the lungs. The horses cough the eggs up and then swallow them, and then they go through the GI tract and are pooped out onto pasture. So they can be diagnosed by Bayerman sedimentation.
Could you possibly, I don't know, I can't see any text like where to type something, but I want to write that down and I just don't know how to spell it
Okay,
off
if
the
I
top of
stop
my head.
sharing,
What's that?
So now you can't see my screen anymore, right?
No.
No, I see you.
Okay, at the very bottom
Uh-huh.
of your screen, there should be a bar, and the bar there should be a chat icon. If you click that on.
Oh, duh. Okay.
Also, Sarah, whatever information you want to send out, so I'll send a follow-up email after this webinar, probably in the next few days with the recording to rewatch. Any information or links or anything you want to include,
Okay.
I'm very happy to do so as well, because
Sure,
we're super
absolutely.
thankful for you doing this for us.
I just have a small little question. My name is Ulrika Wikner. I run a boarding stable, and we have done fecal counts on all of them just to get who was high shedders and who were low. And following what you've found, we had the same. We had, out of 16 pasture horses, we had 3 high shedders.
Yep.
And 1 high shedder in the paddocks out of 20. So where do I go with the high shedders? Of course, they are either resistant somewhat to the medication, or should they just be dewormed more regularly, or just take a fecal, deworm, take a fecal 2 weeks after again, just to see how the reaction is?
So unless you want to do a full fecal egg count reduction test, which I doubt any of the clinics or practices in Red Deer. You're in Red Deer, right?
Yeah, I am.
Yeah. I doubt that anybody would run that. We will eventually roll that out in our lab, so your veterinarians in the area could send feces to us of those high shedders. My best recommendation is work with your vet. So essentially, like 6 weeks after frost is done is when 4 weeks when our frost is done. So usually like June 1st-ish. So we're talking mid-July. That's when I would send your first fecal on those high shedders, have them looked at, evaluate where they are in the high, medium, and low, and probably potentially treat those horses at that point. You could do it again in September, but we're usually getting a good enough frost by into October. And October is when you want to treat with a medication that will treat both bots and tapeworms.
Well, that's what I have been more or less doing, because I go around, it's included in the board twice a year, and I do tapeworm when heavy frost is in, say, December even.
Yeah.
November, December, and then May, June. May usually I deworm just with regular ivermectin, and I do Quest or ivermectin plus in the fall. But I don't want to overdo, but getting all the boarders to actually go ahead and do fecal count is a little bit difficult.
100%.
And it can be difficult when you get new horses as well.
Yes. My recommendation to people that have new horses coming in is that you say, like, part of coming here is that you get a fecal egg count and your horse is treated if necessary. In the winter in Alberta, if they've been treated in the fall, you're usually pretty good. But from, May through October, transmission can occur and those eggs can develop on pastures.
Yeah. Do the eggs survive in a manure pile if it sits and cooks?
If it sits and cooks in the sun, no.
Well, even just under snow, it gets hot as hell.
Yeah. The best, so you have paddock horses, correct?
Yeah.
So your transmission is probably very low because they're not actually grazing. So
I do have pasture horses too, but
you do. Okay, so those are your focus of treatment and monitoring. The paddock horses, unless you know one is a very, very high shedder, they probably only need to be dewormed in the fall.
Oh, only, not even in the spring. And what about
people often deworm too early? So like mid-June to 1st of July is the earliest in Alberta we should be treating our horses.
Okay. Good to know. Thank you. It's been really enlightening.
And Sheila, did that answer all of yours as well?
Sorry. Oh, this is Sara in Utah.
Okay, yeah.
So my horse that's going to be coming from Florida, who's originally from Maryland, she's been, I guess, snowbirding in Florida since November.
Lucky girl.
Yeah, I know. She's going to be disappointed come winter next year here again. But would you recommend having them do a fecal egg count on her before I bring her out here? And then, like, if we find something, should I deworm her out, like, closer to summer out here? I mean, we're cold here, but it's dry cold, and then it's a dry summer. We really don't have a lot of humidity in this part of Utah, or probably any part of Utah.
So I just looked up quickly while you were talking. So there is a veterinary diagnostic lab at Utah State, and they do fecal floats.
Okay.
So
where in Utah is that? Just
I put it in the chat with a link. It is.
Oh, thank you. Hang on.
I'm not sure, but you can courier with an ice pack. That's how we get all of our samples to our lab. You only need like 2 road apples from the middle of the fecal cell in a Ziploc bag that's got the air pushed out of it, and then in a second Ziploc bag, and then in a hard-sided container with ice pack or like a gel pack, cold pack.
Mm-hmm.
and they would be able to do it. They are in Logan, Utah.
Logan. Oh, I can almost drive there. Okay, cool.
Perfect.
Well, it's a bit of a schlep, but
So yeah, it looks like on their general submission form, you'd have to read. I don't know if they see. We require. Oh no, yeah, an owner can submit. At our diagnostic lab, our clients are the clinics or veterinarians,
I
so
see.
everything must come to us through a veterinarian.
Okay.
Um,
Well, I can talk to the vet out here about that too. I mean, he might send samples directly. I don't know.
they might be sending on a kind of a biweekly basis, anyways. So
Mhm.
I
Right.
would guess they are because they have a whole molecular lab, clinical pathology. They do a lot of what we're doing.
Interesting. Yeah, Logan's right up below the border of Idaho.
Mm-hmm.
Not to get political, but I love Canada. I'm not the
You guys are living through some interesting times right now.
oy vey. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm also one of the token Jews in Utah. So
Oh,
there we go.
Okay.
But okay,
There
that's good
was
information. Thank you.
awesome. Yes. Thank you, Sarah and Sarah. Sheila had put a question in the chat, and I think you probably covered this earlier, but she said, "What is the timing for the annual treatments?"
mid-June for first, if medium to high shedders. So if I ever have time, I actually, so Chief, the quarter horse he's now retired where he was bred down in Lethbridge. I bought him while I was in my master's as a 3-year-old, and he's now, don't do the math, 22. Um, and he was in my study herd as a weanling. And so I have fecal data, biannual fecal data on him for his entire life, from weanling to now. And I would really like to publish that because he was a low shedder his whole life, just as a clinical uh, short note in Canadian Veterinary Journal, just because it's kind of neat to have uh, all of that data. He would never have even met the threshold for deworming in 20 years. And he was high risk. He was always a pasture horse, turned out with multiple other horses. We traveled, we showed, we did all the things. And so he was like the risk group of being on community pasture.
That's really fascinating, actually.
That's my geekiness.
No, that's super interesting. Yeah, there's many
It's
things
just
that go into it. Yeah, not just that you're high risk. It's just depends for
it's
sure.
essentially proof that that little graph is true. Like
Mhm.
a high number of the horses will have the very low infections,
Mhm.
and very few horses will have the high number of infections
Mhm.
and be the sick ones.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Just a little question here again from me, Ulrika.
Yes.
Um, so you said that the fecal testing is not always very effective to tell you all the story, but is it enough to do that you eliminate and just do the one dewormer?
Yes. So tapeworms are where the fecal floats fall down in accurately diagnosing. There is a blood serum test that unfortunately no diagnostic labs offer. But the problem with that is, as you know, by being vaccinated and you can check your levels of antibody resistance to a vaccine, when horses are infected with a tapeworm, they build that antibody, but that infection can clear, but the antibody remains. So it also is inaccurate in telling us whether the horse is currently infected. So this is why I think that those combo drugs that treat your bots, strongyles, and tapeworms are your knockout hit that you keep for your fall deworming every year. If you have a high shedding horse that's high strongyle shedding, and you need to deworm them multiple times throughout the season, you go to your your parental pamoate, which is, come on, brain, Panicure. So that is a good one to rotate in your June, July treatment. Safeguard is a fenbendazole, and unless you have an extremely wormy horse that you need to, so the other challenge is if you have a really wormy young horse, or I guess any age horse, if you deworm them with a really effective dewormer and you kill all those parasites in that gut, you saw that the horse gut goes like this, right? If you kill all those worms and suddenly they're all in the guts, they can cause a blockage. So if you have a really, really wormy horse that you don't know the past deworming history on, and you do a fecal count and it's off the charts, you want to start with a dewormer that's not very effective. Obviously work with your veterinarian and they'll help you with this. Start with a Safeguard, wait a week or two, then do something like an ivermectin that will sequentially kill things, and then 2 weeks later do a combo like Equiline Gold or Mox or Quest Plus, because they will treat both the larval stages of the small strongyles, the adult stages, the bots, and the tapeworms. Did I lose anybody there?
No, that makes sense. There's another question in the chat. Is there any sort of genetic predisposition or susceptibility for being a high shedder?
Probably. Do we have any way of testing for that? Absolutely no. So yes, I mean, the example I gave of my quarter horse, who I think his highest fecal egg count was 80. And let me just pull up my presentation again. They keep changing the ranges of low, medium, and high. I'll put it up on the screen again. It's usually about the 200 eggs per gram, which is like the cutoff threshold. Oops. So yes, the low contaminators, they're now saying up to 200. I would have to look at my raw data, but I think Chief was only ever at like 98 at his very highest when he was on pasture with like 14 other horses. So this is like the recommended. And then these guys are going to be like if you have an immunocompromised older horse, they could potentially be more susceptible. I don't think anybody really knows the genetic factors. They probably have other sort of allergies as well.
Yeah, that's like a whole other study that they could possibly get into in the future.
And like I said, I didn't talk anything about lice, ticks. I think as horse owners, like we groom our horses so well, so we would notice those kind of so they're ectoparasites, um, and those are important also to pull off or dust or properly control. And now, well, it's not a parasite, but it's a virus. We do need to be much more careful of West Nile virus in areas, even around here, where a lot of our veterinarians are recommending 2 vaccines now, like vaccinating twice each summer, doing it, closer to when the mosquitoes start to come out. So in like early May, and then again like July to boost their immunity.
Is that you're talking about 2 West Nile vaccinations within a couple months of each other in your area?
Yeah. So you always want to give
Interesting.
your first before the mosquitoes start to come out.
Right.
And then a lot of veterinarians are now recommending another one in like late, mid to late July.
Okay. I don't think the mosquitoes out here in Utah are that bad, but I did live in the Carolinas and it was, oh my God, awful.
I mean,
So,
some of the southern states, they're recommending 4 vaccines a year,
wow.
like the swampy Everglades kind of
Right.
Florida.
Yeah.
But
Louisiana, that kind of stuff.
the mosquitoes are just like they could pick up your horse sometimes,
Just scary but true.
right? I know a lot of people in the south turn their horses out at night and
Yes.
bring them in during the day for the bugs.
Yes, we did. Absolutely. My chrome ginger sensitive mare did not like that at all. She was,
Well,
yeah.
the chief, the red gelding, we had to separate out his vaccines into as few as possible at a time over
Hmm.
like with 2 weeks in between because
Hmm.
he almost died from a 6-way.
Oy, yeah. Yeah, my new one, I've got another chrome ginger mare coming, so hopefully she's not as sensitive as Sriracha was.
Alrighty. So I think we're gonna get close to wrapping it up here. Does anybody else have any questions? You want to put them in the chat or pop on to ask before we wrap it up? This has been a super interesting conversation. Like lots of really, really great information, Sarah. Thank you. And lots of
Thank you.
great questions too, which is awesome.
Well, thank you all for coming to listen to me blabber about my passion, as hopefully you picked up.
Yeah, a couple of thank yous in the chat. For Lynn, yes, yeah, you came in late. Yeah, we will. I will be emailing out the recording in the next couple of days once I get it uploaded to the YouTube.
Hi,
Uh,
Lynn.
Everybody registered will get a link to rewatch if you want to go back through and yeah, reabsorb all this like really awesome information. It was very, very interesting. Okay, so I don't see any more questions or anything. A few more thank yous in the chat. Thank you everybody for attending. I will thank the Alberta Horse Trials Association again for sponsoring this, and Kathleen and High Performance for organizing it. And also another big thank you to Sarah. This was really, really great. Thank you so much. It was great to see your face. I haven't seen your face in several years now, but I hope it won't be so long next time.
I
Yeah.
specifically put in the Alhambra 3-day event pictures just because I was hoping that you and Ulrika would come.
Yeah, and the Cochrane one, I recognize those too.
Oh, that was Tanya Minder.
Oh, nice. Yeah. Perfect. Yeah, she's still on the board with us too. So,
Mhm.
Sarah, yes, you can play this this webinar for your trainer. You can share it with whoever you want. We are very happy to provide these educational opportunities for everybody, and we're really, really glad everybody joined.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I'm sure everyone out here will find it really interesting.
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
just remind them that it's catered to specifically Alberta Northern Prairies, but
Sure. Oh yeah. Yeah, that's not a problem. And all of us at the barn are pro Canada. Yay.
Yay.
Yay. Excellent.
All
All
right.
right, so I think we're good to wrap it up. Thanks again, Sarah. And like I said, if there's any links or any information you want to send out with the link to rewatch, just email them to me in the
yeah,
next day or so, and we are super happy to include them as well.
absolutely. Yep.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, thank
All
you.
right, you're
Thanks, Sarah.
welcome. Everybody have a
Thank you.
great night, and thank you for attending. We will talk to you soon.
Okay, bye.
All right,
Bye.
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 Bye.